All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out and welcome to the first ever SVEC Tarrant Mayoral Candidate Forum. We are so pleased that this all came together and that we had so many of our great candidates come out to introduce themselves to us. But before we get started, we feel like we should let you know about us and our parent group. SVEC Tarrant is a student-led, nonpartisan group with the express goal of reducing voter apathy and increasing youth voter turnout rate. We strive to educate, register, and engage with students across the Metroplex for the ultimate means of getting them out to the polls, because ultimately that's how they influence their local, state, and national elections. Our parent group, March to the Polls, is also a nonpartisan group, and they strive to create lifelong voters in historically underrepresented communities like the youth. They have registered over 30,000 voters, including myself, over 18,000 of whom are young adults. With over 2,000 active volunteers, they make everything we do possible. I'd like to thank all the candidates who have made times in their busy campaigning schedule to come out tonight and talk to us. We really appreciate it, and we're all really looking forward to getting to know you. We'd also like to thank you for all your future service. Running for mayor is no small thing, and it's quite a commitment that you're willing to make, and we really do appreciate all that you're going to do for this community. We would also like to thank the FWISD for all the support they've given us on this long road of making this a reality. They have promoted us in their classrooms, and they've helped spread this forum so we can get as many students as possible here to engage directly with our candidates. And we would also like to thank Las Familias of Rosemont, who helped us with our first two questions tonight and were absolutely vital in making sure that this town hall is going to go off well. And finally, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who is coming tonight just to get to know your candidates, to meet them, and really to understand them. So when you do ultimately go out to the polls, you can make the best decision for the city and yourselves. We know that it's no small thing to take an hour and a half out of your evening, and so we're truly thankful that you've decided to spend it with us. Now, I'd like to introduce Mateen Lindsay and Olivia Castillo, who are going to be running tonight's forum. Mateen, all yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mateen Lindsay. I'm a junior at Pasco High School here in Fort Worth, and I've been working with SVEC for just a while now, and it's really been good. Everything they've done is just, I think, really good for the community. I will be your timekeeper tonight, and I will introduce you to the procedures we will follow. Candidates will get 2 minutes each for an opening remark, and then we will ask questions to all candidates, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer. We will keep doing this for as long as time allows, and to be as fair as possible, the answer order will initially go down the alphabet by last name. Dr. Bird, Mr. Caldwell, who is requested we call him DC tonight, Miss Peoples, and Miss Zeta. After that, it will rotate, so the candidate who goes first now goes last, and all other candidates move up one slot. For example, after the introduction to the first question, after our introductory speech, it will go Mr. Caldwell, Miss Peoples, Miss Zeta, and lastly, Dr. Bird. I will give these hand signals to all candidates to designate the time they have remaining. 1 minute, 30 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We will understand at 0 if you're finishing your sentence or thought, but for the sake of fairness, please do not go over your allotted time. Does everyone understand? Okay, Dr. Bird, please begin your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mateen, and everybody else with SVEC or SVEC, as you called it. And this is a great forum. This is the first one that at least I've been on where it's student-led, and I see 93 participants just on the Zoom here. That's great. And I'm sure we have even more on the social media buzzwork. But so just a quick statement. I had the privilege of growing up here in Fort Worth. I went to Arlington Heights High School. Sorry about that. And I got into public service because the person who mentored me reminded me that great cities don't just happen, and problems don't get solved by doing nothing. But You've got to jump in and steward the city and solve problems and work hard and bring people together and cast vision and get people around you that are smarter than you and have different ideas and different ways of thinking about things so that we can solve problems that we have and run towards the kind of city that we want to see. You know, one example, right after I was elected in 2017 to city council, the Star Telegram ran a series of articles on the Las Vegas Trail area. It's on the west side of town, and it has been a focus of violent crime and gangs and drugs and all kinds of things that aren't good for us human beings. We put teams together to solve some of the problems in there. And here we are 4 years later, first ever community center, first ever Boys and Girls Club. We're doing food distribution twice a week. We're raising money to put a child care center in there so people can drop their kids off. We doubled the bus service frequency, on and on and on. Guess what? It changed real people's lives. It's just been amazing. But to be able to do that sort of thing takes the right sort of leadership of bringing people together around a common mission. And that's what the mayor has to be able to do here in Fort Worth. Thanks.
My turn, Mateen.
DC, yeah, would you like to go?
Well, I don't like giving speeches. I'm not big on sermons, but I do like talks, discussions, conversations. I have been working for Fort Worth Independent School District as well as a couple other freelance jobs since graduating from law school. I have only lived in Fort Worth for a few years, but I think as far as our key audience here of students, I kind of have that less of an age gap. I have been spending more time with students. I want to mostly improve the city's responsiveness and communication with residents. I see lots of little areas where even just looking at the city website, you can improve how well the city invites interaction with city staff who really run the city. The mayor and city council don't really run the city so much as the city manager does. We just would be the ones who hire that person and set the rules that they go by. But I want to engage. I want you to know that I do have a world-class education from Texas A&M and Texas Southern University, and that my heart is in the right place. I care about people. I want to know what your questions are and address your concerns rather than pushing my own agenda and people that really, that's not fair to do when you're basically just bragging about your own accomplishments or shoving your own ideas down other people's throats.
Thank you. Miss Peoples?
So I am so excited. As you can see, I'm sitting in a car. I promise I'm safe. I'm sitting on the passenger side. But of all the forums that we've been on, this is the forum that I would not miss. And I was so looking forward to, because you are Fort Worth. All of us are only stewards of this great city. It is you who are going to be running this city, and many of you are already running it now. And so the work that we are doing today is work that is going to create your Fort Worth. And so the work that I want to do on transportation, around creating employment opportunities, around partnering with educational institutions, about creating good jobs for you and making sure that we are good stewards of this amazing city is what this is all about. I think this is probably the most important forum of all, because many of you, if you're not voters, you're going to be voters, but you're going to be running the businesses and taking care of this great city. So I too want to know your questions. I want to listen to you, because all of us who are running for mayor are creating a Fort Worth that you will inherit, and it needs to be the best city that it can be.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Ms. Zeta?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Ann Zeta, and I currently serve on the Fort Worth City Council representing District 9. I have a background in city and regional planning. My undergraduate degree is in environmental studies with an emphasis in policy and planning, and my master's from the University of Texas at Arlington is in city and regional planning. I worked as a city planning consultant for many small cities throughout the Metroplex years ago, before my children were born. And I was able to advise those cities on how best to run those cities and to write ordinances and long range plans for those cities to help them be better in the way that they grew. I then went on to serve on the zoning commission, and I did that for 6 years as the mayor's appointee. So I was looking at zoning cases across the entire city of Fort Worth, which took me all over Fort Worth. And then when I became the city council representative for District 9, I've been very engaged and involved in the neighborhoods that I represent within the core of the city. And that engagement has brought me in touch with many of you in your schools. I've been very frequent visitor for the Ignite programs in the school districts that work with young people who are excited about the possibility of being future leaders in elected positions, and continue to encourage that kind of involvement in our neighborhoods in Fort Worth. I look forward to furthering some of the things that I've worked on in District 9 throughout the city, things like affordable housing, public transportation, and access and availability of jobs for those of you who, as you come out of high school and go on to higher education, so that you can come back to this community and continue to live in this community and be a part of a great community that has equal access for all of those of us who live here, work here, and come to visit here. And I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all tonight and look forward to the questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Zeta. I'm now going to introduce Olivia Castillo, who is going to be asking the questions tonight.
Hi, I'm Olivia Castillo. Thank you, candidates, for your wonderful introductions. So our first question comes from Las Familias of Rosemont, and they asked, what would you do in the first 90 days if elected? This is starting with you, Mr. DC.
I think I remember responding to this in an email, but in the first 90 days, the issues that are going to come up will include budgeting. They will include the redistricting with the census, and then there will be ongoing public works proposals, and there will be changes within city government. Like I'd like to improve how public hearings are held, so that we can make it so that those who want to participate in public hearings can do so more effectively, because rather you can have breakout tables where their district representative or the mayor records what they're saying and gets a real-time transcript made, and then relays to the rest of the council what they said, and have that participant confirm that what they were testifying to was correctly relayed. And it should save time for the city, as well as help residents to actually have someone who listens to them face to face, eye to eye, to make sure that they're being heard, and so that the communication is two-way, because in a lot of hearings, there's not a lot of feedback to acknowledge the concerns that are raised by residents. I want to promote the Fort Worth Police Department write-in program. I know that just like more than 90% of voters don't actually show up to vote in Fort Worth in mayoral elections. More than 90% of people haven't participated in that. And that's a program I'd like to encourage.
Okay, Ms. Peoples.
So thank you, Mateens. So Olivia, these are very serious issues facing us in the city of Fort Worth. And I have this beautiful 100-day plan that starts with opening up Fort Worth City Hall and looking at our boards and commissions and getting more involvement for citizens across the city, including youth ambassadors. And so I want, because we are building a city for the future, I want to hear from you all. But I'm going to be real honest. When whoever takes over as mayor, and I hope it will be me, we're going to be facing a very serious issue in our city. We're going to be having a trial of a young woman who was tragically killed in the city. And so there is some tension in the city. I think you probably as younger citizens feel it a lot more than many of us, but the city wants to see justice done. And so I think the mayor has to set the tone for the city, that we are a city that cares about each other, that we're a city that's going to work together, that we're going to value everyone, and we're going to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. And so in that first 100 days, I think the mayor is going to have an important job of making sure that we answer citizens' questions, that we calm citizens' fears, and that we get us ready to go forward as we start on this journey to make Fort Worth a lot better. And that's what I will do as your mayor, is make sure that you know, and I am transparent about what is going on in the city all the time, and especially with that very important trial.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Ms. Zeta.
So one of the first things that we'll be looking at right after the elections are over, with likely a runoff in June, is going to be redistricting. We had a vote back in 2016 to add 2 new council districts, and those are very important decisions that are going to be made about where the lines are going to be drawn. I have been an advocate for independent redistricting, and that is something that I've continued to champion through all of these discussions. Unfortunately, we passed a resolution that didn't include a reference to that, but that does not preclude us from moving forward with independent redistricting after the election. So hopefully I will be in the mayor's seat and able to kind of shepherd that through going forward. The engagement that I've done in District 9 and the engagement that I've continued to do as I've been a candidate for mayor, I'm reaching out to neighborhood associations and organizations throughout our city and going to them to communicate in the places that they live their daily lives is something that I will continue to do very strongly in the first 100 days. Anybody that, or 90 days, anybody that I haven't been communicating with up to this point, I will definitely do that. We are moving into a new city hall, and having that place be a place that brings everyone together and is very welcoming to everyone is very important. So designing the council chambers in a way that is less intimidating than the way it is now, and maybe even taking a look at the restrictions that we have on the length of time that people have to speak when they come to council, because we have pulled that back in the last few years and made that harder for folks. And I know, as someone being under time restraints, how difficult that can be. And then looking at youth engagement, we go to National League of Cities every year, and there are youth delegations at that conference every year. And Fort Worth does not have a youth delegation that goes to National League of Cities. And I think that's an area that we're completely missing out, and that many of you would probably be interested in participating in that. So taking a look at putting together some kind of youth delegation to participate in National League of Cities would be something that I would be interested in doing as well.
Thank you, Ms. Zeta. Dr. Bird.
I tell you, I just love these forums. And one is, I always learn something from my fellow mayoral candidates. I always learn something from Ann Zeta, by the way. But the National League of Cities Youth Delegation, that was a new one on me. I think that's a great idea, Ann. So thanks for that. One of the first things the new mayor will have to do is build the mayor's staff. And I've already committed that my staff will look like our city, ethnically and racially. I think that I need to be hearing from people who don't look like me, who experience life in a way that I don't, because we look different. And I think that's paramount for me to be able to do my job well. Secondly, as has already been mentioned, there's two big events that are going to happen within 3 months of this election. One is the trial for Aaron Dean, who is the police officer who shot and killed Tatiana Jefferson. We need to communicate that we are grieved as a city over what happened. We also need to communicate that if we Fort Worthians want to demonstrate and protest, that we will protect everyone's right to do that. And that we set a tone for what that protest and demonstration needs to look like. It needs to be peaceable, it needs to be according to the laws and the ordinances of our city. We want to see that done right. And we need to communicate that we want to see justice done and that there's a fair trial in this. The mayor needs to lead out on that and talking about it and setting the milieu or setting the tone for that. And the second one is redistricting. That's going to take some serious leadership. It's going to take somebody who's been elected, who can work with other elected officials and make sure that we have transparency all the way through that process.
Thank you. Our second question also comes from Las Familias of Rosemont, and they asked, what strategies would you use to address business and residential displacement that often results from traditional urban development and to address crime activity in the Rosemont neighborhood?
So that's a good one, because as someone who lives in the community, in the neighborhood, I live on the east side of Fort Worth, this whole issue of gentrification comes up frequently. And so I think we're going to have to get creative about how we maintain the dignity of our citizens that are already living in communities. And so one of the things, Olivia, that we do now is that senior citizens can get a homestead exemption. They get an exemption so their taxes are frozen. We need to look at creative ideas for long-term residents of our communities to be able to maybe freeze their taxes. I think we have to get creative and look at that, because while we want businesses to come to neighborhoods, we want them to open up, because businesses hire jobs, they hire neighborhood residents, they do things. We don't want them to displace residents. And so one of the things, also you talked about crime. And so I love the Rosemont area, but I also live in a high crime area. And one of the things that I want to do is look at preventative programs. We can't just police our way out of things. We have to look at prevention. We have to come up with programs that where young people like you and older people like me have things to do with their time. We need to have counselors available to talk to people. We need anger management classes to help our youth learn how, and even our older folks learn how to deal with conflict resolution. We need mental health providers. We need, family counseling providers. And so I think we have to be sure that we are keeping our folks safe with our police department, but we also need to focus on prevention, because that's what's going to drive crime down.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Ms. Zeta?
Well, I love these questions coming from Las Familias de Rosemont, because that is a neighborhood that I have represented in District 9 for the last 7 years, although the neighborhood association that's in place now is a newly formed neighborhood association, which I was proud to work alongside in order to get that engagement increased and moving forward. And this is a really important question, because there are areas of the urban core of the city where new development is coming in, adaptive reuse is occurring, and that all happens alongside businesses that exist and residents that exist. And so everyone needs to have a seat at the table to have conversations about what that looks like and how that impacts them. We don't want anyone to feel like they don't want improvements to their neighborhood for fear of being displaced or for fear of the value of their home rising so dramatically that they can't afford to stay there. So as others have mentioned, that there are tax freezing and tax abatements that can happen for residences that are seniors, but we need to make sure that local businesses are able to stay in place as well. And those can be taken care of by having everyone have a seat at the table and intentionally planning and zoning for the appropriate uses that everyone who is part of the conversation agrees is what they would like to see come. And the near South Side has been an excellent example of that. We also have been working with residents when we bring in affordable housing to those locations and gotten behind that type of development in order to bring those affordable units to an area that has gotten more and more unaffordable just due to the growth that has happened in that area. So these are intentional conversations and intentional plans that need to happen in order to ensure that the development that occurs is beneficial to all those that are there and those that are planning to be there as we move forward to improve our city and improve the infrastructure that serves the city so that everyone can continue to prosper in the neighborhoods that they live in our city.
Thank you, Ms. Zeta. Dr. Bird?
Yeah, you know, there's on the gentrification issue, it's such a challenging one. Every city is dealing with it. There's a tension between wanting development and some new things and some great things, and yet the fear of people not being able to afford to stay there after property values rise and displacement. There are a few general principles that I follow. The first one has already been mentioned by our great candidates here, and that's that everyone has to know that they're getting to have input into the process. It requires of the mayor in a city as large as ours to spend a lot of time sitting down over cups of coffee and breakfast and listening to people talk and getting input. When we did the Las Vegas Trail project, we spent the first 6 months doing nothing but listening to the community, and we got our marching orders directly from them. We do official town halls, and shucks, sometimes I'd just go sit in an apartment complex foyer and just talk to whoever would come talk to me. FDR used to say it this way. He'd say, hey, go out there and get the air in your nose, you know? I've always liked that. And what usually happens in these situations is that the people who live in the area offer the best solutions. Well, that just makes the most sense because they know the area so well. There's another principle here that's important, and that's that elected leadership serves as a mediator and a buffer between city staff and the people who live in the area. And so often city staff will tend to run ahead of the project a little bit. And it's up to elected leadership to kind of say, hold on just a second now, let's not skip any steps. And then there's other workable solutions for gentrification. They've already been mentioned. And looks like I'm out of time.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. DC?
I am unmuting. I, for the sake of being easier to communicate, have transcribed my answers into the chat, but with the question, what strategies would I use to address business and residential displacements that often result from urban development? Well, I would start by saying that we should focus new development on lots that are currently unoccupied so that we're not bulldozing someone's home to put a business there, so that we're not having to exercise eminent domain. And I have also proposed that city ordinances be put in place so that when new development increases the property values in the area, the city should rely on the property's value at the time of the last appraisal from when that property owner improved their property for the basis of taxes, rather than the updated appraisal value, because they haven't done anything for us to raise their taxes involuntarily. If they participated in the process of increasing the value of the property, that would be one thing. But it seems unethical to me that their taxes should go up just because someone else did something. Their taxes should be based on what they bought and what they did to improve their property, not on what other people did. I encourage you to read what I wrote. Time's up.
Okay, the rest of these questions are from SVEC. These are questions that matter to us, the students. They have no partisan interest and are merely topics that matter to students across the city. A UT Southwestern Medical Center study has identified 76104 as the zip code with the lowest life expectancy in all of Texas. At 66.7 years, it is 12 years below the national average. What can you do as mayor to address the health disparities within Fort Worth? Additionally, it is worth noting numerous health issues stem from inadequate nutrition, and 11 Fort Worth zip codes have been identified as food deserts. What can you do as mayor to minimize the food deserts and ensure all Fort Worth residents have access to nutritious foods? Do you plan to continue Mayor Betsy Price's Blue Zones project? Why or why not? I believe, Ms. Seda, you're starting.
Absolutely. That is a disparity that we have recognized long before the study came out that identified the issues in the 76104 neighborhood. And again, we continue to study things and then not necessarily make policy changes in order to address those things. So that is definitely something that I would take on in a leadership role in this city. We have worked, there are communities that have tried to ask grocery stores to go into places that are food deserts. 76104 straddles the medical district. So half of that area is in the medical district. So a disparity of not having access to healthcare is just unfathomable. And we definitely need to fix that. And one of the things that we've already put in place is Trinity Metro has a zip zone that covers that area. So now there's easier access mobility wise to get to those centers, but we need to bring healthcare to communities. So there's hospitals that provide those clinics within communities so that people don't have to go so far to access that healthcare. But we need to encourage that to continue to happen. We've also changed some ordinances to allow fresh fruits and vegetables to be delivered in areas in a very different and unique way with community gardens and with pop-up markets and that sort of thing. We've done all that ordinance changing on the city side, but we haven't followed up to see where those are being utilized and where they're being carried out and whether there's been success in that. So I think that following up with that and ensuring that that's something that we encourage it to going forward. Then also just providing economic incentives in areas that have been underserved in the past, which is something that the city can do with our economic development incentives. So those are the things that I would concentrate on. But we definitely need to take a look at those and make sure that we're addressing things equitably across the board and not allowing things to be done in a squeaky wheel gets the grease delivery system. So those areas need to have those resources brought to them so that they don't have to go long distance to get to them. And public transportation is one area that would help deliver those resources.
Thank you, Ms. Seda. Dr. Bird.
You know, the data about 76104 is discouraging, we as leaders should pay very close attention to it. You know, there's just a number of things that I've read, and the education piece I think is super important on you know, healthy choices. And this is, you know, the last part of your question is, should we continue Blue Zones? I think absolutely, because it helps all of us. It helps me. A reminder on, you know, what to eat and why to eat it. And you know, there's, as Ann mentioned, there's a blue zone, excuse me, there's a zip zone. We have a lot of zones. There's a zip zone in that area. And for $1.50, somebody can get a door-to-door ride to the grocery store. And then it's $1.50 to get back. And there's plenty of room in the van to put groceries and that sort of thing. We need to continue to look at innovation when it comes to transit to help us with that issue. I've been a big proponent of vocational education in our high schools. And one of those areas I think can be nutrition. You know, I think one of the questions is, you know, should we have, you know, curriculum that's on cooking? And everybody gets to run through there and learns how to cook, learns how to buy good foods and healthy foods, learns how to prepare it. And then you can hang so much education on that, right? Because you can talk about digestion and vitamins. You can talk about the history of food. You can talk about some wild things that have happened in human history, like the potato that got imported from South America into Western Europe and saved Western Europe, you know, when they had some real issues. And I mean, there's just fascinating things that can be hung on that, and at the same time help us move the needles on some of these. The food desert thing, there's been studies where folks have brought groceries into food desert and it hasn't helped at all. And then other times it does help. And so we've just got a lot of work to do there.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. DC, would you like to answer?
So in looking at that 12 years below the national average statistic, I will point out that zip code has, 3 or 4 hospitals, and a lot of terminally injured and ill, sick people go to hospitals and die there at ages below what they would in other places. In fact, the life expectancy there is lower in part because the hospitals are there, because we don't have that kind of density of hospitals in other parts of the city. Therefore, that zip code gets a disproportionate share of young people dying because they may be injured in another part of the city, but they're brought there and that's where they die. That's what brings, logically, that's a confounding variable for why the life expectancy is lower there. What can the mayor do to that? Well, I would encourage building health centers throughout other parts of the city to kind of spread the burden in that particular aspect, as well as to provide health support to other parts of the city. As far as not providing health care, the health care is available. The ability to afford it might not be there because of incomes or lack of primary care insurance. As far as the food deserts, you know what, you're right. I've been to the Walmart in that area. I would say that I have reached out to HEB, for example, and invited them to open a store in Fort Worth because we don't have any one of their chains. I would also say to open up roads in a couple places that would invite new development where there currently just isn't access to put a store.
Thank you, DC. Ms. Peoples?
So first, I'm going to start by applauding you all for asking that question. As someone who lives in zip code 76103, which is adjacent to 76104, the problem is real. That study is based on data for the residents who live there. It's not people that go to hospitals. It's residents like me and you that live in these neighborhoods every day. Because there is an issue and it's a food desert, people eat poorly. There's a high incidence of high blood pressure, diabetes, especially diabetes in younger person, and a lot of illnesses associated with poor dietary needs being met. And so one of the things that I want to do is we do have to focus on it. We have leadership that has allowed this to happen, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. But as mayor, we need to work on attracting new businesses like grocery stores that bring better products to our neighborhoods. We also need to have them walkable. We don't need to get in our cars and always drive to places or ride a bus to get to a grocery store. In other neighborhoods in town, you can walk to them. I'm a gardener and a beekeeper, and I belong to community gardens because I think we have to start teaching people about better nutrition, but we also have to bring better nutrition to people and not blame it on them, because if those things aren't available, if you can't get fresh apples, you're going to eat canned apples or dried apples, and it's not the same healthy benefit. So there is much work to be done, but thank you all for recognizing the problem.
Thank you for those responses. Our fourth question is, with the shooting of Atiana Jefferson receiving national attention, the frequent Black Lives Matter protests this summer, and the heated debates over the Crime Control and Prevention District sales tax renewal in July, policing has become a contentious issue in Fort Worth. According to Fort Worth Police Department reports in Mapping Police Violence, there are disproportionate police homicides and uses of force against Black citizens of Fort Worth. How will you address this? Also, according to the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, while Fort Worth's police spending per capita is comparable to other cities, our police spending as a percentage of our total budget was significantly higher than other cities. Do you have any plans to reroute the police's budget to other social services, maintain it, or increase it, and why? This starts with Dr. Bird.
You know, the first thing I always say when what happened to Tatiana is, you know, I always point out how shocked and grieved we all were that had happened on our watch to one of our own citizens who was in her house playing video games with her nephew, and she was shot and killed by one of our police officers. It was just a very, very harrowing time for everyone, and we were just shocked and grieved. The mayor has to talk about this and not shy away from it. One of the ways the mayor has to talk about it is to talk about, after that event happened, what went on. We were shocked and grieved, and yet we said, this can never happen again. Let's put some things in place. Let's put some changes in place. We commissioned a group of people to study our police department. They gave us a 44-page interim report in July, and it said a number of things. One of the things it said was, you've got to get better with your de-escalation. They reviewed body cam footage, and cops are coming in hot, particularly in communities of color. And they said those interactions over and over again are doing more to erode trust between our police department and communities of color than anything else. And so our chief at the time, Ed Krause, said, we're going to own it. We're going to get better. And now all of our police officers have gone through de-escalation training again. And we changed how we do de-escalation training. We used to just put it right at the end of our police officer training. Now we integrate it all the way through the 18 months. There's other things that we've done. We've expanded our HOPE teams, which pair an officer with someone who specializes in homelessness. And our crisis intervention teams that pair an officer with someone who specializes in mental health. And we also formed a new division of just non-sworn officers, because there's thousands of calls that come in every year. We don't need somebody with a badge and a gun showing up. We ask too much of our police officers, and we're trying to spread out with some smart policing, better ways to get our job done that we need them to do. And we also need to, while we challenge our police officers to get better, we also need to be behind them 100%.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. DC?
So I am looking at the first part of this question that addresses the number of incidents of police brutality. According to research that I did while in law school, across the country, there are more than 1,000 incidents of police killing civilians every year on the street, which pales in comparison to the 4,000s of inmates that die in police custody without having been sentenced to die, which pales in comparison to the 2 million people total that we have incarcerated. I want to end arresting people for offenses that are nonviolent, that are, as it were, called victimless crimes. I would want a local ordinance deauthorizing police from arresting people from offenses that should be a civil penalty rather than a criminal one. And that will help reduce the total impact of police brutality. As far as rerouting the police budget to other circumstances, I'd like to recognize that many of our police officers have actually gone through significant education and training in psychology and social work before becoming officers or since becoming officers, and have more field experience in conflict resolution than many of the psychiatrists and other licensed professionals that we might send out. But I would reduce the starting salary of a police officer because we have more than 10 times as many qualified applicants as we actually hire. I'd like to hire more officers who don't already have a culture of violence.
Thank you, DC. Ms. Peoples?
So you all are asking the most brilliant questions, and you're asking the right questions, because as a Black woman, I live this. I don't have to look at reports every day. As a person of color and a parent of children, my fear when my children left the house is that they were going to be stopped by police. Many parents of color, I don't care what color you are, whether you're Black, brown, Asian, have to have the talk with our children. That's ridiculous. We should not be fearful when our children leave. And let me just tell you, we do have to do more to put money into prevention. Clearly, I come from a family of law enforcement. I had a brother who was a policeman, a sister who was a constable. I respect police, but I want police to respect us. And no young person, regardless of color or gender or age, should have to fear going out and being stopped by police. We've got to do a better job. 18 months of de-escalation training doesn't get it. We have to do better at recruiting policemen and testing to understand biases and make sure, because we have people that are bringing a lifetime of bias and our citizens are paying for it. So we've got to get creative. We've got to fund more prevention programs. We've got to do better recruiting, testing, and training of police officers.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Ms. Zeta, would you like to answer?
Yes, I think the beginning of your question referenced the tragic death of Tatiana Jefferson. And to start with, I just want to say that that is an absolute tragedy that we should never, ever forget. When it comes to what we ask our police to do, and you also were asking about funding through CCPD. So CCPD is a crime prevention and control funding source. And so there are many partnering agencies that we can work with to address some of the things that we have asked police officers to do. That is not necessarily, it's just taking away the extra work that we've asked police officers to do. So police officers, we want to prevent and solve crimes, and we don't need them to be responding to calls for mental health situations or calls for someone who's dealing with the issues of homelessness. We have police officers that work in our neighborhoods that are our neighborhood patrol officers, and having those folks be really versed in community policing and be invested in the communities that they live in, and also recruiting folks to work in those roles of neighborhood patrol officers who reflect those communities and come from those communities is the best way to make sure that the relationships between our police department and our police officers and the communities that they protect and serve are at the highest level that they can possibly be. Mention of the Hope Squad and the crisis intervention team have already been made, and the non-sworn officers that can deal with, non-sworn individuals that can deal with some of these things that I'm talking about are all very important. But also dealing with some of these partner agencies that bring things like Cahoots is a program that has been in another community that has been brought to our attention that I think we need to look at here locally. Just having those partner organizations and the additional funding that came from CCPD to do some crime prevention and deal with some of the social issues that we have in society and in this city to make sure that folks are not having to resort to crime. So these are all things that we can do to improve community policing and relationships with our communities and our police department.
Thank you, Ms. Zeta. Dr. Bird?
I think it's a new question. Mayor Betsy Price has been an outspoken advocate for education and dispels any criticism that it's not the mayor's job to be concerned with. Did you have something to say, Dr. Bird?
No, sorry, it's just waving at somebody behind the screen here. Sorry, Olivia.
I apologize. Mayor Betsy Price has been an outspoken advocate for education and dispels any criticism that it's not the mayor's job to be concerned with education. What do you see as the mayor's role and responsibility in student education? How will you partner with local school districts to be an advocate for all students in Fort Worth? Starting with you, Mr. DC.
So the mayor's role in education, really devolves upon setting public policies, since the manpower, the city employees are under the direction of the city manager rather than under the mayor and city council. The public policy might be one of insisting that city departments provide workshops in cooperation with the school so that students and families have interaction on a regular basis with the city staff in order to be able to have their concerns addressed and resolved in a timely fashion. The mayor can also, so by public policy, I also kind of refer to a culture or a set of values where we recognize that lifelong learning is important. I actually want to encourage students to start taking their first college class, not as a freshman in high school, but at the age of 11, when they're still finishing up elementary school, because that's when they can. If we say kinesiology, and we know that college classes pretty well automatically qualify for reciprocity for high school credit to help our students graduate either on time or early. I think that would, in fact, both give them a foot in the door for starting college, as well as help ingrain in them the importance of health. Since we just got done with a question about health, kinesiology is about being and keeping yourself healthy through exercise. It, as well as, with that as the first class, it would already have them in the system with the community college to start taking classes toward whatever degree that they might set a goal to seek.
Thank you, DC. Ms. Peoples.
So at the beginning of this call, I told you that we are building a Fort Worth for you. And so you better believe that the mayor needs to be involved and care about education. And so I know that we have a school board that does that, but the mayor needs to be working hand in hand with the school board about what your needs are. We need to be preparing you and giving you the best education, because guess what? In a few years, you're going to be coming out and you're going to be the ones that are not only going to be taking jobs, but you're going to be the job creators. You're going to be the people that are building businesses here and growing businesses. You're going to be the people buying homes and making decisions about our life. And if we're not giving you a world-class education, then shame on us. And so, yes, while the mayor doesn't run the Fort Worth ISD, the mayor needs to be meeting with the superintendent to find out what your needs are. What do you need to get the best education possible? And then we need to be doing the things to make that happen for you all, because we're going to be depending on you. You are the future leaders of this city.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Ms. Zeta.
This is a great question. I will start off by saying that for many years, the city of Fort Worth has put off, like you said, and said it's the independent school district. It's something separate from the city and it's not under the city's purview. But everyone knows that having strong schools and neighborhoods makes strong neighborhoods, and strong neighborhoods makes a strong city. So we have in the last few years put in place an educational strategist. It was our former library director for a couple of years, and now there's a gentleman named Lawrence Thompson who is working with stakeholders throughout the community to come up with initiatives that the city will champion to support all of the ISDs that touch the city of Fort Worth, of which there are numerous ones. So they will definitely be making efforts to make sure that all of our community centers, all of our after-school programs, any program that the city of Fort Worth has in our libraries, our community centers, are additive to outcomes for students, and work alongside and in concert with the ISDs and the schools to find out what is helpful to them to make sure that our student outcomes are beneficial. In addition, like I mentioned, doing the partnerships with our community centers and in our neighborhoods, what I have encourage neighborhoods to do is to support the schools that are in those neighborhoods. And you don't have to have a child that goes to school there to support those schools. Showing up for their book fairs, showing up for their walkathons, helping out with their PTAs. There's some schools that don't have as many parents that are able to be as active in those schools, and older people in neighborhoods. If you have a passion for education, if you have a passion for helping students, there are multiple ways in which you can support the schools that are in the communities that you live in. And if everyone is supporting the schools that are in the communities that they live in, all of those schools will improve. And so all of us partnering together is what is going to make for better outcomes for students and better outcomes for all of our community, because having well-educated kids coming out of our schools is going to lead to a solid workforce, and that's going to just make a stronger city.
Thank you, Ms. Zeta. Dr. Bird?
Yeah, the city has a keen interest in how our ISDs perform, because our young people are our future. They're our future workforce. If we want to be able to recruit great companies here to Fort Worth, we have to have a workforce that can help those companies create the products and services that they want to sell all over the world. And so the mayor, as the leader of the city government, has to partner hand in hand with the ISD. I thought Mayor Price did a really nice job of this. She did a nice job of highlighting our third grade reading levels that are not up to snuff. Same thing with our ninth grade math levels. But she didn't do it in a way of pointing fingers and saying, oh, you guys are bad or not doing a good job. She did it in a way that was winsome, the way a leader should. And it's taking the right hand of friendship with our friends at the ISD and say, hey, we're all trying to go to the same place. Let's get there together. One of the things I've been an advocate for is vocational training in our schools. When I talk to businesses around our city, some of our big ones, like Acme Brick, they say, where are the vocational schools? We need more of them. And when I talk to tech companies, they say, where are the kids that can code, do computer programming? We have them in other cities. We don't have them enough here in the city of Fort Worth. When I talk to the Tarrant County College chancellor, he tells me, we'll set any program up that any business wants to run. And so it's up to the mayor to connect these people, right? Connect the providers of that education with the businesses that need them. But the independent school districts have to help us by taking a step into this. One of the things I did in LVT, Las Vegas Trail, is I recruited a great charter school in there with the open hand and the encouragement of the Fort Worth ISD. They said, Brian, there's more kids in there than we can possibly educate. And so please help us. So we recruited a fantastic charter school that's just doing a great job in there for us.
Thank you. Our sixth question. According to data from the U.S. Census Bureau and Texas Department of State Health Services, minority groups and low-income residents are being vaccinated at much lower rates, even though the coronavirus is hitting them the hardest. Vaccines in North Texas are mostly going to white, wealthy people. Additionally, Fort Worth was labeled as a hotspot for the anti-vaccine movement, according to a national study published by the Public Library of Science Journal. How can you help lower-income residents and minorities receive the vaccine and encourage getting the vaccine in general? This starts with Ms. Peoples.
So you all are asking the most amazing questions, and they are questions that I keep teeing up too. So the first thing I will tell you what I've done, not what I can do, but I started a public information campaign in the communities of color to talk about why we needed to get the vaccine, higher incidence of contracting the disease, higher death rate. So we started this whole public information campaign. I do a Tuesday talk on Facebook Live. We discussed why people of color might not want it. We started a campaign to help people register for the vaccine. And then working with several doctors and partners, we were able to connect churches with facilities to become vaccine sites in our communities because we needed to make these vaccines available. So I know what we need to do. First of all, we need to reassure residents that it's safe. I went publicly on to talk about taking both my shots, and I described the process, but then we made sure that we were answering people's questions, understanding people's fears, and meeting people where they were. But I think the most important thing is putting the clinics in communities where residents could go get them and didn't have to travel long distances or have to stand in line for a long time. COVID is real, and we need to be making sure we are still wearing our mask. Even though the governor has opened up the state, we know that it's real. There is a funeral tomorrow for someone who just died of COVID at 56 years old. So we have to continue to walk the walk, talk the talk, continue to social distance, and make sure that we are making sure that people in our community are being able to take advantage of the vaccine.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Ms. Zeta?
I absolutely think the answer to this is making sure that we are doing education based on science and encouraging people to do what they need to do to remain safe during a pandemic. As Ms. Peoples talked about, we definitely need to continue with the protocols that are recommended because not everyone is vaccinated. We need to have the vaccine available across the city. We don't need to always have it be a drive-through center. Not everyone is driving. I've been pleased to see that Trinity Metro has provided free access and free transportation to some of the places that vaccines are available. We need to help people get registered and help people sign up for the vaccines because in the beginning, we started out with a lot of technological ways of doing that without everyone having access to those things. And so that has led to a lot of folks just not having the ability and the access to them. But I think at this present time, we're definitely doing the large centers that these are located at, but partnering with various hospitals and pharmacies and doing collaborative efforts where we're bringing the vaccines into churches, as was also mentioned. I was able to join some ministers that were doing this throughout the community, and then encouraging people to be public about the fact that they are getting the vaccine in order to keep us all safe. So I've shared with folks during this entire pandemic that I was masking wherever I was going. I was trying to do as much as possible from home, and then encouraging folks to get registered and go and get the vaccine when it becomes available to them. We just need to make sure that people are educated based on science and then answer any questions that they have and answer those questions in whatever language they speak. So making sure that there are people available to answer questions in all of the languages that people speak in the city of Fort Worth so that they can feel comfortable and have all the information that they need in order to continue to keep themselves safe.
Thank you, Ms. Zeta. Dr. Bird?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is we need to articulate that one of the reasons folks are hesitant to take the vaccine is because what has happened historically to people of color by the medical community. And that's some horrible things have happened. And so it's understandable that there is distrust. So we need to address that head on. I can tell you as a physician that these vaccines have already saved thousands of lives and that they're safe and that they're good for us. We're having a hiccup now with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There may be a blood clotting issue, and the FDA said, hold up on that until we get this figured out. We have got to get creative in our messaging, right? We need to work with local leaders, but we've got to do some things that we're not doing. You know, there's some TV campaigns, and there's creative ways to do that. And the mayor needs to say, I'll tell you what, I'll shave my head if a certain percentage of people in this area get back. Just stuff like that to draw attention to it. And then lastly, we do need to prioritize where we are putting distribution center for these vaccinations, and that they're in areas where the vaccine uptake has been the lowest, and that gives people the easiest opportunity to get vaccinated and take away any of the barriers of transportation as much as possible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bird. DC?
So to help lower income residents and minorities receive the vaccine, I would say that there are 44 fire stations throughout the city of Fort Worth, there isn't a part of the city that is really too far from a fire station, because the fire department pretty well has to have a pretty darn quick response time. That being said, vaccines could be made available at the fire department. Meanwhile, in terms of encouraging getting the vaccine, well, so often we treat it as an obligation rather than opportunity. We treat it as a have to rather than a get to. Being told that you must do something, there are many of us who, when told we can't do something, will do it just to spite the person who put a limitation on this. Others have the, yes, admittedly juvenile response of, when told that they have to do something, clean up your room, they refuse to do it because they weren't given any input into this decision-making process. So instead of asking people to just do it, you have to have a conversation where you ask them, why don't you want to do it? People don't want to follow instructions when they don't feel like they're being heard and they have no participation in the decision-making process. So I would ask people, literally, I would invite discussion. Why don't you want to get it? If price is an issue, I don't really believe that, because you can get it for less than $50 just about anywhere at many of the clinics.
Thank you. Mayor Betsy Price has expressed concern for the environment and has passed resolutions to tackle climate change. However, Fort Worth has still been criticized for its insufficient climate action plan. According to the American Lung Association, Dallas-Fort Worth has some of the worst air pollution out of all metropolitan areas in the nation, and a study by the Nature Conservancy found children in North Texas suffered higher rates of asthma than the rest of the nation, with asthma rates getting worse depending on socioeconomic and racial composition of a school. Furthermore, many Fort Worthians have been enraged by the recent clearing of trees. What are your plans for addressing climate change, protecting the environment, and combating environmental injustice? Ms. Seda?
This is a perfect question for me. Thank you very much. With my environmental studies background, the environment and climate change and the justice of making sure that our communities are all safe for all of our residents is very, very important to me. I am proud to have worked alongside the Sierra Club, and when we were looking at some of the changes that we can make in the city of Fort Worth regarding reduction of waste, recycling, and bringing a composting program to the city of Fort Worth. We have, during this time of COVID, where there has been less driving, actually seen a decrease in our air pollution. And that is something that I, along with the people who serve on the Regional Transportation Council, have been working really hard to try to figure out how we can not go back to the normal of all of the driving that was occurring before, that was leading to that unattainment air quality that we have struggled with for many, many years. So many of the things that I champion, such as public transportation, are things that can reduce the amount of pollution that we have in our area. And so working really alongside all of the public transportation agencies in our community and providing a multimodal transit system that allows people to be mobile in our community in various ways besides getting in a car every time they need to go somewhere. Doing that locally at the city level, but also working within the region of all of the 13 counties that are touched by the Regional Transportation Council. Are all ways to increase this, but we absolutely need to have a more intentional environmental strategy within the city of Fort Worth that looks at all of the things that we can do to have more sustainable development, to have less air pollution, to have more recycling and reuse, because recycling is not the key anymore. We have to get back to reuse and not creating as much waste as we have, reducing the amount of trash that goes into our landfill, encouraging commercial properties to recycle as well as our residential, and expanding that composting program that I was talking about previously.
Thank you, Ms. Seda. Dr. Bird.
Yeah, it's fascinating. If you look at pictures of Fort Worth from 100 years ago or more, it's interesting. There were no trees here. There was hardly a tree, and it just got a little bit along the banks of the Trinity River. There are so many more trees in Fort Worth now than there were 100 years ago. And that's because human beings have come along and stewarded and taken care of them and planted them. We have a tree ordinance here that is a little bit looser than Arlington's, and it has to do with when a developer wants to put a new project in an area, what percentage of the tree canopy has to remain, what percentage of the trees have to remain. Arlington's is a little bit tighter than ours, more protective of trees than ours. And I think it's worth, taking a look at that here in Fort Worth to make sure we're protecting our tree canopies. And yet we don't want to make it too restrictive that we diminish development, right? There's a balance that has to be struck there because we need the right kind of development and good development. And secondly, I think mobility is a key piece to this. I've encouraged our folks at Trinity Metro, which receive a 0.5-cent sales tax, about $100 million a year with everything they get or so, to provide transit for us, to continue to look at innovation for solutions for transit. And we talked about one earlier, zip zones. It allows folks go from door to door. We've got to do better on pushing that and encourage ridership in that. We put it in place right before COVID started, so it didn't really get a chance to catch on. Everybody was like all of us here, we were stuck at home. But we really need to start pushing on the zip zones. I think it's a fantastic solution for us.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. DC, would you like to go?
All right, so the question asks, what is my plan for addressing climate change? The climate is continually changing. We usually call it seasons. Whether the weather's getting hotter or colder depends on which decade we're in, because a few years ago, I think it was the 70s, climate scientists were predicting another ice age rather than global warming. So I will freely acknowledge that we have man-made climate effects, but the primary interest being in protecting the environment. As an Eagle Scout, I was taught leave no trace. I was taught to try to leave things cleaner than we found them. When it comes to combating environmental injustice, the city uses something called a municipal setting designation, which relieves companies that own property from liability for environmental remediation, cleaning up the messes that they made. We shouldn't be granting those. They're usually granted unanimously. So I would oppose municipal setting designations. I would make those who pollute responsible for cleaning up the spills and messes that they made, whether it be an auto shop that dumped a bunch of oil on the ground or whatnot. I did quote a comedian, really, the earth will be fine.
Thank you, DC. Ms. Peoples?
So I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I know that we have to be good stewards of the earth. And so because I want a world that my granddaughter is going to grow up in, and if we're not careful, the earth won't be fine. And so I'm going to talk specifically about what you asked about systemic racism and the impacts on communities of color with pollution. And so I'm going to tell you how I don't just talk about these things, I walk the walk. And so many years ago, I was instrumental in working with a group of residents in the southeast part of Fort Worth to close a lab that was spewing carcinogenics in the air and a lot of smoke and pollution that was harming the residents and especially children with high rates of asthma. And it was Anderson Labs. And because of the work we did, we were able to get that lab closed. Because if you will look historically, many of these factories that do this pollution are located in communities of color. And then more recently, I live on the east side of Fort Worth. There was a concrete crushing plant that wanted to be located about across the street from a school. And residents in my neighborhood, me among them, gathered to protest that and lobby our city council person to have that permit withdrawn. We can't keep talking about the impacts of climate change. We have to act to make sure that we are protecting the earth for you.
Thank you. Is public transportation an important priority for you? How would you ensure that all residents of Fort Worth have good access to public transportation? And I believe this starts with Dr. Burt.
You know, we've seen public transportation have two main roles in our city. The first is to help people get to work and the grocery store, and for a lot of our folks who can't afford their own automobile. The other piece that we're seeing that's very, very important, among others, is that you know, folks that are your age want it. You know, our kids are in college and high school, and they and some of their friends were not nearly as excited to get their driver's license when they turned age 16 as it seemed like we were. And you know, I think it's sort of just a changing dynamics of who we are as Fort Worthians and Americans, and our ability to attract talented folks who are finishing college, and our ability to attract businesses that want to hire people like that is tied to the transit system that's here. We're way behind. Everybody can see that. The amount of money we spend on transit compared to other cities, our size is a fraction of what they do. We missed an opportunity back in '96 when we only put a half-cent sales tax instead of a full-cent sales tax towards it. And we've been paying the price for that ever since. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a proponent of innovation. Let me give you an example. We're looking at expanding TexRail south to the medical district, which would be really cool, but it's $100 million a mile when we look at it. And that is a tremendous amount of money to come up with just for that little section right there, which we all want. It would be great. We have to find innovative solutions to help us get there.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. Ms. Peoples? I'm sorry. DC, would you like to go?
Is public transportation an important priority for me? I would say so. I have definitely used public transportation in Austin, Houston, Dallas, and Fort Worth. I don't think I've used it in San Antonio. Every metropolitan area with high density meaning referring to the number of people who live in a square mile, relies on public transportation of some kind in order to simply not be completely congested with cars all the time. Public transportation includes things like bringing your own 2 feet. In college, I used to call it the 2-shoe express. Public transportation includes encouraging people to walk instead of drive, to ride bicycle, and have a place where people can chain up their bike. Public transportation includes, yes, buses and trains, but it also includes the private companies that provide services to the public. It used to be just taxis. Now we have Uber and Lyft and the zip zone provided by Via. as well as other companies like Alto, and I don't even pay attention to all of them. The big ones stand out, but they are part of our public transportation system now, even if they're not receiving public funding. And that is an improvement in technology that has benefited hundreds of millions of people in this country alone. I would ensure all residents have access to good public transportation by encouraging expansion of the zip zone and partnership with Uber and Lyft, and expanding the light rail, and then some road improvements.
Thank you, DC. Ms. Peoples.
I love that you asked this question right after the environment question. And so let me start by telling you that great cities have to have great transportation systems. You just, in a city as big as ours geographically, but also population-wise, we can't continue to rely on cars and roads to get us everywhere. And so also to protect the environment, we cannot continue to put cars that are polluting the air on the road year after year after year. And so if we're good stewards of the environment, we have to believe in mass transportation. But also, as we're trying to grow this city and we're creating a city where all of us can live in it, we have to give people options. Yes, there are some people that still want to drive their car, but there are a lot of people who are going to want to use public transportation to get from A to B. And we have to make those options available to them. So I'm a big one on mass transportation. I believe we have to be visionary and come up with a plan that benefits everybody, whether you're a senior or you're a student who needs to hop on a train to get to school. So I'm there with mass transportation.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Ms. Zeta.
Absolutely, 100%. I support public transportation and mass transit for the city of Fort Worth and access to that. A city such as ours that is approaching being the 12th largest city in the country needs a world-class transit system that is a multimodal system that is made up of all of the ways to get around. So having rail, having buses, having bikes, having people walking. Every transit every transit ride starts and stops with a walk. So this is a multimodal system that we need to have to serve all of our community. Mass transit and public transit serves everybody, regardless of age, regardless of ability, and regardless of socioeconomic status. So having a world-class transit system, in addition to serving all of those people and allowing us to get around and helping with environmental issues and helping with mobility and congestion issues, it's also an economic driver. So when you have access to transit, it's more valuable for the housing that's nearby. It's more valuable for the businesses that are nearby, and it helps those businesses be more successful. So we at the city of Fort Worth has put together a plan that, as has been mentioned, is a visionary plan. And that is the plan that we need to be moving forward with. In addition to working with our partners at the Regional Transportation Council, on which I serve, and our partners in our Trinity Metro and the other public transit systems across the entire region so that people have access. We have also just done, or Trinity Metro has just done, a complete redesign of the bus system and is looking at making those improvements going forward under the funding that we currently have. But additional funding will definitely be necessary. We need to be ready and prepared for shovel-ready projects that are available, that funding may be available from the federal government. And we need to have all of those plans in place, and we need to not give up on ideas or let dollars that are available be passed on to other communities that are more ready and able to implement those dollars in our communities. So absolutely, I support world-class transit in Fort Worth. All of us should be able to make a choice about how we get around, and continuing to build roads and can fill those roads with cars is not the way to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Zeta. The time for this forum is up. I would like to thank candidates for participating in our forum. I would like to thank SVEC and March of the Polls for sponsoring this event. And thank you to all of our attendees participating, especially students. As a student myself, To see the success of this event means a lot, especially because students are usually a forgotten voting bloc. Please don't stop your participation in local government here. Early voting for the mayoral election is April 19th through 27th, and election day is May 1st. Go vote. Thank you, everyone.
Great job.